Coming up on this special edition of the ICT Newscast, we meet the National Native American Law Enforcement Association's Police Chief of the Year. A film covers the importance and history of Buffalo, and a Rosebud Sioux citizen is being elevated in the financial sector. We have those interviews ahead.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
The ICT Newscast is sponsored by the Indian Land Tenure Foundation, a nonprofit organization serving American Indian nations and people in the recovery and control of their rightful homelands. On the web at iltf.org.
Support for the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez comes from the Arizona PBS studios in Phoenix at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University. Thank you for joining us on this special edition of the ICT Newscast. I'm Mark Trahan. We start today on the East Coast. As Chief of Police for the St. Regis Mohawk Tribe in New York, Matthew Rourke faces some unique challenges, not the least of which is the international border that runs right through his nation. But Rourke has risen to the occasion. He was named Chief of Police of the Year by the National Native American Law Enforcement Association. ICT's Stuart Huntington caught up with the chief and asked him about this honor.
I was very humbled and kind of unaware that this award was being given to me. It's at the 2023 NALIA conference, which is the National Native American Law Enforcement Association conference held in Las Vegas every year.
Sir, one of the big issues in law enforcement in Indian country is relationships with other law enforcement agencies. Tell us a little bit about your experience.
Partnerships is always the best thing to have, right? We have a great working relationship with our local towns that are around us. At the federal level, we have a port of entry that's about 6 miles away from us, the Fort Covington Port of Entry. And we have
that's with Canada, correct, sir?
Yes, yeah. Both ports of entries are over there for the U.S.-Canada border. So you have just down the road from there, and then right at the edge of our territory, about a quarter mile down the road, is our major, the Messina Port of Entry. So we are a unique area because of an international border that goes directly through our community that divides our community between the north and a southern boundary. You go onto a little island, and then you cross over, and there's another customs building, the CBSA, the Canadian Border Service Agency, that our people have to travel through every day. They have to pass their house in order to, they have to go through the customs, and because of that border, they got to turn around and come back. Those are the agencies that are here, and just around our community on the Canadian side. You have our Akwesasne Mohawk Police Services, which is our brother or sister agency just to the north of us that covers our northern portion, the Canadian portion of our reserve. They are also Quebec and Ontario certified because of our uniqueness of here. And surrounding that, we have our local police departments, the Cornwall Police Department, the Long Sioux, all those little townships that are out there. But they also have the OPP, the Ontario Provincial Police, the Quebec Provincial Police, the RCMP. So around this small area of our community, you can tell that we have several law enforcement agencies in this whole North Country.
Which can breed confusion. And to help ease communication in this complicated landscape, Chief Rourke helped build a cultural sensitivity tool.
This is an introduction to the culture, history, and contemporary issues of Akwesasne. It's intended for those who serve the public at border crossings close to the community. We hope to inspire you to learn more about us and our unique cultural heritage.
So we actually did a video on that and with Customs and Border Protection. And that's kind of what brought this award about, was my partnership with the Border Patrol and with Customs to understand that, it might have been a result of these agencies don't know how to treat maybe Native people when they came through because they never had nothing to fall back on, right? So now they have a video. So a whole bunch of agencies around here, when they get transfers, they show them this video now. It's only been for the last year. that here, watch this video.
Where Chief Rourke stresses the list, LIST, where L stands initially for language.
Our people, when you have your language, that has to carry on because it covers a lot of things. It covers, if you lose your language, some people say that everything else will follow. So our language is huge. Our land, land is, every Native community, for whether or not our waters are being destroyed by something, or our land, they're drilling out west. We're always going to tell you, this is our land. We're going to protect it. Those are two things under the L. Under the I have as our identity. Identify as Mohawk. When you ask you, where are you from? I'm a Mohawk from Akwesasne. People from Seneca Nation are going to say, I'm Seneca. The whole nation are going to say that. We're going to tell you right up front, because we're proud to be a Native person. And they're going to tell you that when you get pulled over or do whatever. Where are you from? So that they're going to identify as. S is our sovereignty, our right to have our own police department, right to have our own law enforcement agency, a right to have our own health services, our education, and so on and so on. That is our sovereign right to have our own government. The T is for treaties, such as the J Treaty, that allows us to cross that border internationally, to buy goods on both sides of the borders, to be able to cross, to go in our community without being challenged. And the last one is trust, T for trust. And all of that begins if you get pulled over, again, just coming from the law enforcement perspective. If you come through a U.S. Customs, you come through these things, you get pulled over outside the territory. And how does that elder feel when that gets pulled over by a trooper or by a customs person or border patrol? And where are you coming from? Oh, you're coming from the reservation. In their minds, it goes all the way back to residential schooling. What happened with law enforcement from way back then, the nervousness of how they feel. They're not jittery because of the fact of while their license is valid, they're nervous about how some of their parents are treated, right? So you have to be with them. There's that trust of how they're going to feel treated. So there's that trust factor of where all these things have come apart. So we have to instill that trust by teaching this awareness, this cultural sensitivity. What's in the car? There's medicine in there. It's sweetgrass. It's our tobacco. You can't touch that. These certain things, and know about our ceremonies. So that's the trust.
Chief Matthew Rourke, thank you so much for joining us today.
I appreciate it.
I'm joined now by ICT's Paris, Wise, and Phoenix for a look at an upcoming project exploring an animal that we talk about often on our newscast, and that's buffalo.
Thanks, Leah. The American Buffalo is a two-part 4-hour film that explores the significance of buffalo, past and present. I spoke with consulting producer Juliana Branham to learn more. Take a look.
The American Buffalo is a very comprehensive look at the history of the American Buffalo through the eyes of several characters involved in the full story, both in the destruction of the animal, those indigenous people who survived and built their entire cultures around, and the amazing sort of comeback of the animal through the work of several unlikely groups of people.
And can you talk about your involvement with this film and the production process?
I am a descendant of Kawana Parker. He is my great-great-great-grandfather. And a chunk of the story centers on him and his efforts to restore the bison. And so they reached out to me to see about working with them. And of course I was ecstatic and joined the team and, helped through the whole process of securing some interviews, creating, forming relationships with people in the Native community that work with buffalo restoration. I assisted with archival research, and then of course in post-production, helping to kind of get guidance on some of the nuances of the Indigenous perspective.
Who were some of the experts interviewed in the film, and how were they chosen?
Well, we have a variety of experts who work in buffalo conservation specifically, and scholars, Rosalind LaPierre, Jermaine White, Sarah Dant, just an amazing collection of diverse voices. And also, who I was most thrilled with was N. Scott Momadang, and his perspective as a Kiowa person and how the buffalo relates to us culturally, I think was a really important person to have, an important voice to talk about, because I think it's difficult for people to really understand that deep connection that many of our tribes in this country had, and the dependence on that animal, not just for survival, sustenance, but for their whole cultural belief systems and spiritual beliefs. So we worked hard to get a wide range of voices, and not just the academics, not just the scholars per se, but those that are deeply rooted and involved in the work. You don't need a PhD to understand the relationship to this animal.
I'm so glad you touched on that. That's a perfect segue, because oftentimes genocide or Native people in these historical contexts are recounted from the lens of colonization, and Natives are bystanders in their stories, as opposed to us hearing it directly from the Native perspective. So how is Native representation and narrative approached in this film?
I mean, it was obviously from the very beginning of the project, something that was very important. You have a lot of complicated non-Native people, characters. They're not necessarily very sympathetic people, even those that are working in conservation, in the later years, as they were working to bring the buffalo back. But they're complex individuals, and I really appreciated how the writer Dayton Duncan and Ken Burns and the whole team really worked to not sugarcoat anything, and to be pretty explicit about who these people were, regardless of their intentions. And so, including the Indigenous voices throughout is completely imperative to the story. You wouldn't have the story if you didn't have those voices. So I think we did a really good job of contextualizing those relationships and that history. And it's very complicated. Like I said, it's very nuanced. It's not black and white. These relationships were fraught with one another. We have completely, differing value systems and worldviews that were in complete conflict with one another. And so, I think that's what makes the story so special, is you're not seeing it from the lens of those that came, the colonizers that came and destroyed the animal, or those that came back, in the end to help restore it. But you're getting the full view of why this story is so tragic and so important. You give that background on the Native experience, but then it also provides sort of a contemporary lesson for us, because we still engage in these sort of things where we are still a destructive, society in many ways. So I think that's, the real beauty, I think, of this is that it gives you that deeper insight than you would see with any other film. And I think that truly comes from the voices of the Native people themselves. So
you touched on acclaimed documentarian Ken Burns, who produced and directed this project. What was it like working with him, and had you worked with him before?
I have not worked with him before, and it was such a wonderful experience. The entire team is so devoted and so just passionate about getting the story right and accurate. And even though Ken is a non-Native person, the way he was able to incorporate those stories with such detail and care and sensitivity was really honorable. I mean, I was really happy with the experience that I had.
There's some really beautiful and fun to watch footage of the buffalo. Where was a lot of that filmed?
Oh my gosh, we filmed everywhere. Probably nearly every buffalo herd in America. Yellowstone, obviously, probably featured the most. The Nature Conservancy, their different grasslands, the tall grass prairie in Oklahoma, Caprock Canyon in Texas. It's just, the Badlands in South Dakota. You really get an understanding of the expanse of our country and where these animals roamed and where they're being reintroduced again today.
What do you hope viewers across Indian country take away from this film?
I hope that viewers take away the lesson of our history. I hope that people can better recognize our influence on the environment, and not in just the destructive way, but also in ways that we can start rebuilding from those past wrongs. I hope it helps people to understand Native people a little bit better, to understand our value systems and our world views and how we view the earth and the world in which we live, and how to protect our natural world and resources.
Well, The American Buffalo will air on PBS on October 16th and 17th. Julianne Branham, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
In mid-July, Dawson Her Many Horses was named Managing Director at Wells Fargo. It marks a rare moment for an Indigenous person to be promoted to such a position at a major U.S. bank. Aaliyah Chavez sat down with him recently to talk about his new role and about how tribal communities are being overlooked by investors.
Dawson, thank you so much for joining us on the ICT Newscast.
Thanks for having me.
You have been named the Managing Director of Wells Fargo. Tell us exactly the duties and responsibilities of a role like this.
Yeah, Managing Director in finance is one of the highest titles that you can get. I think it's kind of a recognition of certainly of seniority, but there's a lot of expectations of folks with that title. I think managing directors are people who've been identified as people who are good kind of carriers of culture of an organization, right? Who promote and represent kind of what an organization aspires to be and kind of wants their employees to be. And so I think, this title is a recognition of that, but it's also just a responsibility, right? It's a reflection of kind of duties and things that, we do as bankers in finance.
Can you provide some context into how many Native Americans have been elevated to a role like this before you?
It's a great question. And I think a friend of mine, who kind of tracks these things, who works in finance, said that, I'm the first Native American that he knows who's been named managing director. Like, we don't have records, we don't kind of know who may have been in this position before. And so I think, at Wells Fargo, we've said I'm one of the first Royal Tribal members, but, I don't think there's been anyone else before me. So.
Last fall, you wrote an op-ed about how Native American communities can be overlooked by investors because of lack of data. Tell us about that.
Yeah, Native American communities, tribal communities are economically invisible, right? We don't have a lot of business and economic data about them. And I think what that does is that it impacts the ability of capital to kind of flow to Indian country and to support the projects that, tribal communities need, right? For example, in 2017, NCEI issued a report that said that, Native American housing needs totaled almost $34 billion, right? And I think, the federal government has a trust responsibility to kind of, to provide that funding. We certainly do our part to fund tribal governmental projects, but, between us and the federal government and other banks, like we can't supply enough capital, right, for those housing needs. So we need capital to come from other places, but we need to kind of show the opportunity. We need to use that data to show the opportunity in Indian country, right? And I think when we're able to do that, I think we'll start to get the all the goods and services that we always talk about. More stores, more banks, more things like that to kind of come into our communities and give us the services that we all need. So that was the intent behind that op-ed.
We know that there is already a discrepancy in the kinds of data that is collected about tribal nations. In your opinion, what kinds of critical and essential data needs to be collected?
First, I think we need to kind of collect data in a way that respects the confidentiality of individual tribes, right? I think we want to make sure that we don't give folks who don't always support tribes information and put out information that they may use in a way that harms tribal communities. So we're not advocating for tribes to kind of share their confidential data, but what we are asking and encouraging tribal leaders to think about is, how can we share information and data about the industries that tribes are operating in, right? NIGC publishes gaming revenue data that got published last week on an annual basis, and they're showing that tribal casinos generate $40.9 billion in revenue last year. If we could do that for all the other industries that tribes operate in, and then maybe put it into a pilot economic report, I think that would kind of get a lot of investors' interest, right? Because I think what they'll see is that tribes are real and legitimate businesses, right? They're real markets to operate in. And I think, as a lender in this space, like we know that tribal borrowers are good credit. They're good credits, but they're good borrowers, right? And so if we can get more of this data out that kind of frames the opportunity in Indian country, I think we can get more of that capital, more of that financing to kind of flow into our communities and help with all the products that we need and help the businesses that, are eager to support the development of the tribal economies.
You've worked with Wells Fargo to rebuild its program on Native American communities. If you had to pick a single success that you've been most proud of, what would it be?
The report that we issued last fall, the Tribal Economic Resiliency Report, I think for me represented was kind of a big accomplishment. One, because it was the first time like a major bank has ever kind of done a research report on Indian country, and to me that's like so surprising, right? I mean, we have so many banks that kind of work in tribal communities, and to kind of get the support to do that kind of project, like for me was just really fulfilling, right? Because the report itself like went into how tribes can become more economically resilient, and I think that was a really powerful is a really powerful kind of example for me, or accomplishment. I think a related accomplishment has been kind of this discussion around tribal data, right? We hosted a convening last November in conjunction with the Aspen Institute, and brought together a bunch of tribal leaders, policymakers, natives who work in the private sector, tribal organizations, and we all got together and started talking about the need for more business and economic data. And people loved it. I mean, there's a lot of sensitivities around this issue, but we were able to talk about it in the NFOA conference in April, at NCEI in June, and we're talking about reconvening again this fall to kind of talk about next steps and what we can do. So for me, those are probably the two big things that I consider big accomplishments.
Role models are a critical part of success. Tell us about some of the role models that have shaped your life and career.
Yeah, I would say, when I think about this journey, right, and I was thinking about it before we started, I think a lot about the people who helped me get here, right, and I think about a lot of our leaders, and I remember when I started in finance, there weren't a lot of role models. There still aren't a lot of role models, and I think about, I was just at Wheatland, and I've been thinking a lot about the women who kind of had an impact on my life, and for me as a young banker, Eloise Colbell and Wilma Mankiller were big mentors of mine, right? When I wanted to quit, there were a couple of times when I wanted to quit because, it was hard, right? And I think the culture of Wall Street where I worked and the way that I grew up didn't always align, but Wilma Mankler and Eloise both encouraged me to, stay in it. They told me like Indian country needed me and people liked me in these roles. And, Eloise used to say, we're going to need a CEO at Native American Bank. Right. So it was like encouragement like that I think really helped me stay the course. And it's probably a big reason why I'm here. Right. Just the mentoring and encouragement of our elders is played such a big role in my life. And it also kind of reminds me that like I'm in that position now, right? I need to kind of encourage those youth. And so it's something that I try to do. And but I just wanted to acknowledge all those folks like that who support all of us in our careers, right? Like we probably wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for them.
Well, Dawson, thank you so much for your time today.
Great, thanks for having me.
And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.